Corporal Mara Kincaid stood barefoot in the frost-rimed mud of Proving Ground 17, her breath clouding in the pre-dawn chill, and stared at the Valtorian commander who just called her soft. She'd heard worse. Hell, she'd been called worse by her own drill sergeant back on Ganymede. But something about the way Commander Thexis folded his forearms and clicked his mandibles made her jaw tighten. The rest of his squad, 5 more Valtorians in gleaming composite armor, laughed in low, chittering hisses. Behind them sat their pride, an 80-ton Mark VII assault tank, barrel pointed skyward, treads caked in frozen soil. "Humans break," Thexis said, his translator collar rendering the words flat and final. "You will quit before midday." Mara rolled her shoulders, feeling the old familiar ache in her lower back. The one her mother said came from helping Grandad haul hay bales every summer until she was 12. She glanced at the tank, then back at Thexis, and let a slow smile spread across her face. "How much you wanna bet?" The field exercise had been scheduled for 3 days, a joint coalition training op meant to test interspecies teamwork under extreme conditions. Mara's unit, 3rd Human Expeditionary, callsign Ironside, had drawn the short straw and been paired with the Valtorian Sixth Tactical, who'd made it clear from day one that they considered humans a liability. The Valtorians were tall, chitinous, and built like armored mantises. Their homeworld had 3 times Earth's gravity, and they moved through the Proving Grounds obstacle courses with mechanical precision. Mara's own squad, Lieutenant Chen, Sergeant Akoy, and Private First Class Ruiz, had kept their heads down, focusing on the drills. But Mara had a habit of pushing back when someone pushed first. It was a trait her father called stubborn, and her mother called loyal to a fault. Either way, it had gotten her into trouble before. The bet started small. Thexis had pointed at a stack of supply crates, each one massing 200 kilos, and suggested that if the humans could move them to the rally point before his squad finished recalibrating their tank's targeting system, he'd stop calling them mammals in that sneering tone. Mara had agreed, and she and Ruiz had hauled the crates in under 15 minutes, muscles burning, sweat soaking through their fatigues despite the cold. Thexis had barely blinked. "Adequate," he'd said, "but a tank is not a crate." That was when the real dare came. He gestured to the Mark VII, its bulk casting a long shadow across the muddy field. "If you can move this, lift it, even 1 meter, I will personally submit a commendation to your command. If you fail, you admit humans are unfit for frontline deployment." The other Valtorians chittered again, a sound like gravel in a tin can. Mara's squadmates tensed. Chen started to step forward, but Mara waved him off. "Just me?" she asked. "Just you," Thexis confirmed. "No exosuits, no grav-assists, your biology against ours." Mara walked a slow circle around the tank. Its treads were taller than her waist, its turret bristling with sensor arrays and ablative plating. She tapped the undercarriage with 1 boot, solid, cold, unforgiving. The Valtorians watched her with compound eyes that gleamed like oil slicks in the early light. She thought of her grandfather, who'd once told her that the strongest people he knew weren't the ones who could bench press a truck. They were the ones who showed up every day, no matter how heavy the load. She thought of her mother, who'd worked double shifts at the orbital refinery to send Mara to the academy, and she thought of the look on Thexis's face when he said soft. "Deal," she said. "But when I do this, you owe me more than a commendation. You owe me an apology." Thexis's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Agreed." Mara crouched low, wedging her fingers under the tank's front left tread assembly. The metal was ice cold, biting into her skin. She adjusted her stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees bent, and took 3 slow breaths. Around her, the proving ground had gone silent. No wind, no engine hum, just the faint crackle of frost underfoot. She pulled. Nothing happened. Thexis made a sound like a sigh. As expected. Mara shifted her grip, digging her heels into the mud, and pulled again. This time she felt something give, A faint groan of metal, a shift in the tank's weight distribution. Her back screamed in protest, her quads lit up like they were on fire, and her vision tunneled to a point of white-hot focus. The tank's front end rose 6 inches off the ground. The Valtorian stopped laughing. Mara didn't let herself think. She adjusted her stance again, sliding her hands deeper under the chassis, and heaved upward with everything she had. The tank lifted another foot, then another, until its treads hung suspended in the air, and Mara stood trembling beneath 80 tons of military hardware. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breath came in ragged gasps, and somewhere in the back of her mind she registered Chen shouting something, maybe encouragement, maybe a warning, but she couldn't hear it over the roar of blood in her ears. She took one step forward, then another. The Valtorians didn't move. Thexis's mandibles hung open, frozen mid-click. Mara carried the tank 10 meters across the proving ground, her boots carving deep furrows in the mud, and set it down with a sound like thunder. She straightened, wiped her hands on her fatigues, and looked Thexis dead in the eye. "Who's next?" The silence stretched for 5 full seconds before Sergeant Okoye started clapping. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, and within moments the rest of Ironside joined in, Chen grinning like he'd just won the lottery, Ruiz whooping loud enough to echo off the distant ridgeline. Even a few of the Valtorians shifted their weight, mandibles clicking in what Mara had learned to recognize as grudging respect. Thexis, however, remained still. His 4 arms hung at his sides, and his compound eyes reflected the pale morning light in a way that made them look almost vulnerable. Finally, he inclined his head, a gesture Mara knew from cultural briefings meant acknowledgement of a superior. "You have proven your point," he said. His translator collar flattened the words, but Mara caught the faint tremor beneath them. "I miscalculated." "Yeah," Mara said, rolling her shoulders to work out the knots. "You did." She turned to walk back to her squad, but Thexis spoke again. "How?" Mara paused. "How what? How did you lift it? Valtorians are bred for high-gravity endurance. Our exoskeletons distribute load across reinforced chitin. You are smaller, softer. By all metrics, this should have been impossible." Mara thought about lying, about making up some story about genetic augmentation or secret training protocols. But the truth was simpler and somehow more powerful. "My granddad used to say there's no such thing as impossible," she said. "Just things you haven't figured out yet, and I figured out how to lift your tank." Thexis's mandibles twitched. "That is not an answer." "Sure it is." Mara grinned. "You just don't like it." She rejoined her squad, and Chen clapped her on the back hard enough to make her stumble. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," he said. "Also the dumbest. You could have blown out your spine." "Could have," Mara agreed. "Didn't." Ruiz handed her a canteen, and she drank deep, the cold water soothing the burn in her throat. Around them, the proving ground was starting to wake up, other units emerging from their barracks, the distant whine of dropships warming up for the day's exercises. But the space around the Mark VII felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. Lieutenant Chen pulled Mara aside, his expression shifting from amusement to something more serious. "You know Command's going to hear about this, right? Probably before lunch." Mara shrugged. So you just made yourself famous, or infamous, depending on who's telling the story. Let 'em talk." Mara handed the canteen back to Ruiz. "I'm not here to make friends." Chen's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" It was a question Mara had asked herself 100 times since joining the expeditionary. The academy had been her ticket off Earth, a chance to see the galaxy and prove she was more than the kid from the refinery slums. But somewhere along the way it had become about something else, about showing people like Thexis that humans belonged, that they weren't just soft mammals playing soldier. "I'm here to do the job," she said finally, "same as anyone." Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But for the record, I'm glad you're on our side." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of drills and debriefs. The Valtorians kept their distance, though Mara caught Thexis watching her more than once with an expression she couldn't quite read. At midday, the squads regrouped for a tactical simulation, a mock assault on a fortified position using live ammunition and kinetic shields. Mara's role was heavy gunner, hauling a 30-kilo plasma rifle through a maze of trenches and razor wire. She moved with the same focus she'd brought to the tank, ignoring the ache in her muscles and the sting of sweat in her eyes. Ruiz covered her flank, Chen called targets over comms, and Akoi coordinated the advance with the precision of a chess grandmaster. By the time they breached the objective, Mara's fatigues were soaked through and her hands were shaking, but the flag was theirs. As they regrouped outside the kill zone, Thexis approached again. This time his posture was different, less rigid, more open. "You fight well," he said. "Thanks," Mara replied, checking her rifle's power cell. "You too. I owe you an apology." Mara looked up, surprised. Valtorians didn't apologize easily. Their culture valued strength above almost everything, and admitting error was seen as weakness. "Go on," she said. Thexis's mandibles clicked softly. "I judged you based on assumptions. That was dishonorable. You are not soft. You are formidable." Mara felt a knot in her chest loosen, one she hadn't realized was there. Apology accepted. She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Thexis reached out with one of his own. His grip was firm but careful, as if he were afraid of breaking her. "Perhaps," he said, "we can learn from each other." Mara grinned. "Yeah, maybe we can." The next day brought rain, cold, pelting sheets that turned the proving ground into a swamp, and made every step a battle against suction and mud. Mara's squad was assigned to a joint patrol with the Valtorians, a 12-kilometer sweep through rough terrain to locate and neutralize simulated enemy positions. The rain made visibility near zero, and the comms crackled with static every few minutes. Mara trudged forward, her boots squelching with every step, and tried not to think about the blister forming on her left heel. Beside her, Ruiz muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer or a curse, possibly both. Chen was up front with Akoi, coordinating with Thexis's second-in-command, a Valtorian named Crixus who spoke even less than his commander. Halfway through the patrol, they found the first target, a camouflaged bunker tucked into a hillside, its sensors pinging faintly on their tactical displays. Mara set up her plasma rifle on a low ridge, sighting down the barrel while Ruiz called out range and windage. The rain made the shot tricky, but she'd done trickier things in worse weather. She fired. The bunker's shield flared, registered the hit, and flickered out. Mission accomplished. "Nice shot," Thexis said over comms. He was positioned 50 meters to her left, his own weapon trained on a secondary target. "Clean and efficient." "Thanks," Mara replied, already moving to the next position. She'd learned over the past 2 days that Thexis wasn't much for small talk, but when he gave a compliment, he meant it. The second target was harder. It was embedded in a ravine, protected by overlapping fields of fire, and a minefield that their sensors barely picked up. Chen called a halt, and the combined squads huddled under a rocky overhang while he and Crixus worked out a plan. "We could flank from the east," Chen suggested, tracing a route on his holomap. "Use the ridge for cover." Crixus shook his head, or whatever the Valtorian equivalent was. "Too exposed. We would be cut down before reaching effective range." "Then we go straight through," Akoi said. Fast and hard, suppressing fire from the ridge breach team down the center. Thexis clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "That requires someone to draw their fire. A distraction." Mara looked at the ravine, then at her squad, then at the Valtorians. She knew what was coming before anyone said it. "I'll do it," she said. Chen frowned. "Mara, I'm faster than most of you, and I've got the armor to take a few hits." She tapped her chest plate, which was reinforced with ablative composite. "I run the gauntlet, you guys hit them from the sides. Simple. Simple is not the same as safe, Thexis said. Since when do you care about safe? Mara shot back, but there was no heat in it. She could see the concern in his posture, the way his lower arms twitched like he wanted to reach out and stop her. Chen sighed. If you're doing this, we're doing it right. Ruiz, you're with me on the east flank. Akoi, take Crixus and 2 others to the west. Thexis, you're on overwatch with that big gun of yours. Mara, you've got exactly 30 seconds to get their attention and get out. Understood? Understood, Mara said. She checked her rifle, adjusted her helmet, and took a deep breath. The rain hammered against her visor, distorting the world into streaks of gray and green. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. On my mark, Chen said. 3, 2, 1, go. Mara launched herself down the slope, her boots slipping on wet stone, her rifle slung across her back. The enemy sensors locked onto her almost immediately, and simulated fire erupted from the bunker, bright streaks of light that scorched the air around her. She zigzagged, using every scrap of cover she could find, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack a rib. A round clipped her shoulder and the impact knocked her sideways. Pain flared hot and sharp, but her armor held. She kept moving, kept running, and heard Chen's voice over comms. Flanks in position. Firing now. The bunker's attention split. Half its guns swung toward Chen's team, the other half toward Akoi's. Mara used the distraction to close the distance, skidding into cover behind a boulder just as Thexis's heavy cannon roared overhead. The bunker's shields flared, buckled, and collapsed. Target neutralized, Crixus reported, his voice calm despite the chaos. Advance and confirm. Mara stayed where she was, sucking in ragged breaths and trying to ignore the throb in her shoulder. Ruiz appeared beside her, his face pale beneath his helmet. You okay? He asked. Yeah, Mara lied, just a scratch. He pulled out a med scanner, ran it over her shoulder, and shook his head. Bruised, maybe cracked. You need to get that looked at. After the mission, Mara said, pushing herself to her feet. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced them to hold. Thexis was waiting at the bunker's entrance, his rifle still smoking faintly. You took unnecessary risk, he said. It worked, Mara replied. This time. His mandibles clicked in agitation. What if it had not? Mara met his gaze, saw the worry there, and felt something shift in her chest. Then you would have finished the job, that's what squads do. Thexis was silent for a moment, then nodded. Yes, that is what squads do. The injury was worse than Mara had thought. By the time they made it back to base, her shoulder had swollen to twice its normal size, and every movement sent lances of fire down her arm. The medic, a no-nonsense Terran named Dr. Patel, took one look at it and ordered her to the infirmary. Hairline fracture in the clavicle, Patel said, studying the scan results. You're lucky it didn't snap clean through. No field duty for at least a week. A week. Mara sat up too fast and the room spun. Doc, I can't. You can and you will. Patel's tone left no room for argument. Push it now and you'll be out for a month, maybe longer. Mara slumped back against the cot, frustration boiling in her gut. She'd worked so hard to prove herself, to show the Valtorians and everyone else that humans weren't weak. And now she was stuck in a damn infirmary while her squad went out without her. Chen came to visit that evening, bringing a tray of what passed for food in the mess hall, protein bars, rehydrated vegetables, and something that might have been coffee. He set it down on the side table and pulled up a chair. How are you feeling? He asked. Like I got hit by a tank, Mara said. Oh wait, I lifted a tank, maybe that's the problem. Chen snorted. Yeah, maybe. For what it's worth, Thexis has been asking about you. Mara's eyebrows shot up. Thexis? Yep, came by command 3 times today, wanted to know when you'd be cleared for duty. Chen leaned back, crossing his arms. I think you made an impression. Great. Now he thinks I'm fragile. I don't think that's it. Chen's expression turned thoughtful. I think he respects you and maybe worries about you, which is new for him. Mara picked at the protein bar, her appetite gone. Why would he worry? I'm just another soldier. Because you're not, Chen said quietly. You're the human who lifted his tank. You're the one who ran into enemy fire without hesitation. You're the one who made him rethink everything he thought he knew about us. He paused. That's a lot of weight to carry, Mara, and not all of it's physical. The words settled over her like a blanket, heavy and warm. She thought about her grandfather again, about the way he'd always said that strength wasn't just about muscles, it was about heart. And she thought about her mother who'd carried the weight of a family on her shoulders for years without complaint. I don't want to let anyone down, Mara said finally. You won't, Chen replied. But you've got to take care of yourself first. That's not weakness, that's survival. He left her with the tray and a promise to check in tomorrow. Mara ate the protein bar mechanically, staring at the ceiling and trying to ignore the ache in her shoulder. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the base was settling into its nightly routine. Footsteps in the corridor, the hum of generators, the distant murmur of voices. She was almost asleep when the door opened again. She cracked one eye, expecting Chen or maybe Ruiz, and nearly fell out of the cot when she saw Thexis standing in the doorway. "Commander," she said, struggling to sit up. Hi." Thexis stepped inside, his movements careful, almost hesitant. "I apologize for the intrusion. I wish to see how you were recovering." "I'm fine," Mara said automatically, "just a little banged up." Thexis's mandibles clicked softly. "Dr. Patel informed me that you sustained a fracture. That is not a little banged up." Mara felt her cheeks heat. "Yeah, well. Could have been worse. It could have been avoided." Thexis moved closer, his compound eyes reflecting the infirmary's harsh lights. "You should not have volunteered for the distraction role. I should have insisted on another plan." "It worked," Mara said, echoing her earlier words. "We completed the mission." "At what cost?" Thexis's voice was quieter now, almost uncertain. "You injured yourself to prove a point. To whom? To me?" Mara opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because he was right. She had volunteered to prove something, to show that humans could take risks, endure pain, carry burdens that others thought impossible. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being about proving a point and started being about not letting people down. "Maybe," she admitted. "A little." Thexis was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out with one of his lower arms and placed it gently on the edge of her cot, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "You have already proven yourself," he said. "You do not need to break yourself to do so." Mara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "I'm not breaking." "Not yet," Thexis agreed. "But you will if you do not rest, and that would be unfortunate." There was something in his voice, something raw and honest, that made Mara's chest tighten. She looked up at him, at the alien features she'd once found intimidating, and saw only concern. "Thanks," she said quietly, "for checking on me." Thexis inclined his head. "It is what squads do." He left as quietly as he'd come, and Mara lay back against the cot, her shoulder throbbing in time with her heartbeat. But for the first time since the injury, she didn't feel frustrated. She felt something else, something warm and steadying, like a hand on her shoulder or a voice saying you're enough. She closed her eyes and let herself rest. Mara returned to duty 6 days later, her shoulder still stiff but functional. Dr. Patel had cleared her with strict instructions not to lift anything heavier than a rifle for at least another week, and Mara had agreed with as much grace as she could muster. Her squad greeted her return with a mix of relief and good-natured ribbing. Ruiz made a joke about her starting a tank-lifting business, and Alcoy presented her with a hand-drawn certificate that read Official Badass Ironside Division. But it was Thexis's reaction that stuck with her. He'd simply nodded when she rejoined the formation, his mandibles clicking in what she'd learned to recognize as approval, and said, "Good to have you back, Corporal." "Good to be back," Mara had replied, and meant it. The final exercise of the joint training op was a full-scale combat simulation. 2 squads against a fortified enemy position, complete with live fire, kinetic shields, and aerial support. It was the kind of scenario designed to push everyone to their limits, and Mara could feel the tension crackling through the air as they geared up in the pre-dawn darkness. Chen gathered the combined squads for a final briefing, his holomap flickering with tactical overlays. "We've got 3 objectives," he said. "Neutralize the anti-air battery on the North Ridge, breach the main gate, and secure the command bunker. Ironside takes the ridge, Valtorian Sixth handles the gate, and we converge on the bunker together." Questions. Crixus raised one of his arms. "What if the enemy reinforces the bunker before we breach?" "Then we adapt," Akoi said. "That's what we've been training for." Thexis looked at Mara, his compound eyes glinting in the low light. "Corporal Kincaid, are you prepared?" Mara checked her rifle, adjusted her helmet, and nodded. "Always." The assault began at 600 hours. Mara's team moved through the scrubland in a tight wedge, using every scrap of cover to avoid the enemy's sensor sweeps. The anti-air battery was positioned on a rocky outcrop, its guns trained skyward, its shields humming with power. Mara set up her plasma rifle behind a low wall, sighting down the barrel while Ruiz called out adjustments. "Range, 400 meters. Wind, negligible. Target locked." Mara fired. The shot punched through the battery's shield and detonated its primary capacitor in a shower of sparks. The guns went silent, and Chen's voice crackled over comms. "Objective 1 complete. Move to rally point Alpha." They regrouped with the Valtorians at the base of the ridge, and Mara could see the main gate looming ahead, a massive steel structure flanked by guard towers and razor wire. Thexis's team had already begun their assault, laying down suppressing fire while Crixus led a breach squad forward with shaped charges. The gate exploded in a burst of flame and smoke, and the combined squads poured through the gap. Mara moved with them, her rifle hot in her hands, her breath coming fast and hard. Around her, the simulation erupted into chaos, enemy fire streaking overhead, shields flaring, voices shouting over comms. But beneath the chaos was a rhythm, a coordination born from days of training together. They reached the command bunker in under 10 minutes. It was a squat, reinforced structure half buried in the hillside, its entrance protected by a kill zone of overlapping fire lanes. Chen called a halt, and the squads regrouped behind a line of boulders. "We need a breach team," he said. "Volunteers." Mara stepped forward, and so did Thexis. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. "Together?" Thexis asked. "Together," Mara agreed. They moved in tandem, covering each other's flanks as they sprinted across the kill zone. Enemy fire tracked them, shields flaring with every hit, but they kept moving. Thexis planted a charge on the bunker's door while Mara laid down suppressing fire, and when the charge detonated, they were the first ones through the breach. Inside, the bunker was a maze of corridors and defensive positions. Mara and Thexis moved like a single unit, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. At one point, Mara's rifle jammed, and Thexis covered her without hesitation while she cleared the blockage. At another, Thexis took a hit that would have knocked him down if Mara hadn't grabbed his arm and hauled him behind cover. By the time they reached the command center, they were both breathing hard, their armor scorched and dented. The enemy commander, a holographic projection for the purposes of the simulation, raised its hands in surrender, and the exercise ended with a blare of klaxons. "Mission complete," Command's voice echoed through the comms. All squads returned to base for debriefing. Mara and Thexis stood in the bunker's command center, surrounded by the wreckage of the simulation, and grinned at each other. It was the first time Mara had seen Thexis truly smile, a slight upward curve of his mandibles that made him look almost human. "We make a good team," he said. "Yeah," Mara replied. "We do." Back at base, the debriefing was surprisingly brief. Command praised both squads for their coordination and adaptability, and even singled out Mara and Thexis for their leadership during the final assault. Afterward, the combined squads gathered in the mess hall for what passed as a celebration: protein bars, reconstituted coffee, and a sense of camaraderie that felt hard-won and real. Thexis found Mara near the coffee dispenser, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" Mara asked, filling her mug. "For teaching me that strength is not only physical." He paused, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "You lifted our tank, but you also lifted our assumptions. That is a greater feat." Mara felt her cheeks heat and she ducked her head to hide her smile. "You're not so bad yourself, Commander." "Thexis," he corrected gently. "We are no longer just Commander and Corporal. We are friends." The words settled over Mara like a warm blanket, and she looked up at him, seeing not an alien warrior but someone who'd fought beside her, trusted her, worried about her. "Friends," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." They stood there for a moment, two soldiers from different worlds, bonded by mud and fire and the simple act of showing up for each other. Around them, the mess hall buzzed with laughter and conversation, but in that small corner by the coffee dispenser, the world felt quiet and still. Mara raised her mug. To second chances. Thexis raised his own, and to finding strength in unexpected places. They drank, and for the first time since arriving at Proving Ground 17, Mara felt like she'd found something worth holding onto, not a title or a commendation, but a connection. A squad, a family. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Mara finished her coffee, set the mug down, and turned to Thexis with a grin. "So," she said, "what do you say we go see if I can lift that tank again?" Thexis's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as laughter. "Perhaps we should start with something smaller." "Where's the fun in that?" And as they walked out into the fading light, side by side, Mara knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever missions, whatever impossible tasks the galaxy threw at them, they'd face it together. Because that's what squads did.